Go ahead and take your seats. We'll go ahead and get started this morning. I thank you all for being here at our panel this morning and for being here at the Texas Public Policies Foundation's 14th annual policy orientation for the Texas Legislature. We really appreciate your attendance and your interest in all the issues that we're doing here and in other places in the pursuit of liberty. Before we get started, this panel does have CLE credit, so if you're interested in that, there's a sign-up paper right there on that first table over there. You can sign up anytime over there and put your name down for that now or at the end of the presentations. And we'll go ahead and get started with the topic at hand. So my name is Bill Peacock, and I'm the Vice President for Research here at the Foundation, but also direct our Center for Economic Freedom, and that's where I come into issues of labor unions and labor relations in general. Everybody agrees that workers should be respected, treated respectfully, and be respected by their employers. But that agreement starts to break down a little bit, to dissipate, once the conversation begins about just exactly what that looks like and how you accomplish that in real life. On the one end, you have the situation where some people say that the relationship should be completely voluntary, that there really should not be much regulation about it at all, that the employee ought to, be able to work or not work, leave or be employed based on what they believe about the pay and the conditions and the way they were treated and those types of things. On the other hand, there's more of a mandatory approach where some places and some states and some people think that there should be, the unions, employees should be mandated to be in unions if at least a majority of the employees at a business believe that. And then also that the company should be mandated to deal with the union as the representative of those employees. So our panel today is really going to look at this broad range of issues generally to see where we are in Texas along this spectrum. And we're also going to look at some of the battles or discussions that are going on in this area or that have been or maybe should be discussed and waged when it comes to labor relations here in Texas. Of course, the classic battle that has been waged for many years is whether or not a state should be a right-to-work state. Texas has been a right-to-work state for many years, and perhaps that's one reason we don't see as much of the battles here in Texas as we do in other states. But another discussion began last legislative session about whether the government should serve as the collector for union dues for a union any more than it should collect donations for charity and any other private organization. So our panel will examine this issue and some other issues, as I said, as we go along the way. So we'll go ahead and get started with our panelists. Our first panelist today is Vincent Vernuccio. Vincent is the Director of Labor Policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Michigan. Of course, probably no state better exemplifies the problems in labor relations than Michigan does, particularly when you look at the auto industry in Detroit and the surrounding area. Surprisingly, at least for some of us, Michigan recently became a right-to-work state. And so Vincent is here to talk to us about some of the happenings up there, but also give us a broader national perspective on some of the issues when it comes to labor policy. He is, under President George W. Bush, Vincent served as a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary for Administration and Management at the Department of Labor. He also has published articles and op-eds in such newspapers and magazines as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Investor's Business Daily. Would you please join me in welcoming Vincent Vernuccio?
Well, Bill and TPPF, thank you for inviting me down, and thank you all for coming to this panel. By the way, anytime you want to invite me down to Texas in January or February from Michigan, I am more than happy to accept. That's a blanket acceptance going forward. It was 12 when I left the house yesterday. I want to cover a lot of ground today, talk a little bit about what's going on nationally, talk a little bit about what happened in Michigan, how the state with the 5th highest union membership rate, the birthplace of the UAW, long considered a labor stronghold, became a right-to-work state. But before I get into all that, I want to tell all y'all about a brand new concept that we came up with at the Mackinac Center. By the way, I'm just a northern boy. Did I use that right? All y'all?
Yeah.
Was that correct?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Well, you see on your chairs, you have a booklet. It's called Workers' Choice. And Workers' Choice gets to the heart of one of the main issues that a lot of unions have with right to work. And, you all know that right to work means that a union can't get a worker fired for not paying them, but doesn't affect collective bargaining in any other way. They can still negotiate over hours, wages, benefits, anything they can with the right to work. Without a right to work law, they can negotiate for with a right to work law, except the ability to say this worker isn't paying us and they should be let go. Now, before I go on, y'all are doing a great job down here in Texas. I know you hear that a lot about a lot of issues. Labor is one of those ones where you're excelling, especially that you are a right-to-work state. The collective bargaining in the public sector, which I'm not going to propose to be an expert on in any way. You have police and fire that can collectively bargain, and I know it's limited besides that. But what Workers' Choice does is it simply says that workers in a right-to-work state that opt out of their union should be able to represent themselves, which unfortunately they cannot do now. Even in a right-to-work state where the worker doesn't have to pay the union, they still have to accept representation. They still have to be under the union collective bargaining agreement. They still have to accept the union to represent them during most grievance hearings and problems with their employer. If they want to have many conversations with their employer, if that's covered under that collective bargaining agreement, they can't do it by themselves. They have to go through the union. Now, a lot of unions say that, well, they're free riders because they're getting all this. Now, a lot of workers, they don't want that representation. But if a union at one time in the past organized a majority of workers, they have to accept that representation. So we came up with a concept that simply said, let's give workers the ability to say no thanks to that representation, and let's give unions the ability to say goodbye. No, you're not paying us, we're not going to represent you. It's fair for everyone. Doesn't change anything else about collective bargaining. You still need one union. That union represents a majority of employees. All the unionized employees are still under that one union, so you don't get micro-unions. Difference is that workers are given a binary choice. You're in the union, you're paying the union, you're accepting that representation, or not, and you're representing yourself. Now, for private sector employers, that has to be done at the federal level. But here in Texas, you guys can do it for the public sector employees, and I know that's probably going to be limited to mostly police and fire. But this is a new concept, and you may be the first in the nation. I know that doesn't scare a lot of you, but I would love to go around saying, no, we're not talking about right to work here. We're talking about Texas-style right to work. So you guys have an ability to be a leader in the nation. Well, let's talk about what's going on across the country. I don't know, have any of you heard about a case called Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association? It's being argued on Monday in front of the Supreme Court. The argument is that everything that a government union does is political. So if they're collectively bargaining with a public employer, or if they're bargaining for wages or benefits, well, that comes from taxpayer dollars. So if they get more wages and benefits, that comes at the expense of, let's say, funding parks. So the argument is that everything a public union does is political. They call it inherently political. If the Supreme Court rules favorably in this case and says that public employees have a First Amendment right, a free speech right, not to pay for union politics, which is everything that these government unions do, then essentially the entire country's public sector is right to work. Now, it doesn't affect you out here in Texas much, but for states like California, states like Illinois, states like New York, which you're doing a little bit better at, by the way, they're going to be following your lead. Well, there's 25 right-to-work states. Wisconsin was the last one. Before that, Michigan was 24, and then before that, Indiana. West Virginia is looking at right to work. They may be voting any day now on the bill. Missouri experimented and couldn't override the governor's veto, but they're going to be coming back in a couple other states. So the fire of worker freedom is shining brightly, and it is spreading across the country. And once again, people are basically taking the Texas lead again. But in Michigan, what's going on? We didn't follow your lead for a while. We lost a decade. In Michigan, we had the highest population out-migration for years. Almost 10 years, we were losing population year after year. We had the highest unemployment rate in the country. Our home values were plummeting. Our wages were falling. We were not doing well, to say the least. Then things started to turn around. We started to get rid of an awful tax climate and regulatory climate, change our business tax. We enacted worker freedom in 2012. And let me tell you, things are coming back. I moved to Michigan in 2012 and bought a house, brought my then fiance, now wife out there, and part of me was a little nervous, saying, well, what if things keep going the way they're going? I knew right to work was on the horizon. I knew the unions were pushing back, and we were fighting a ballot proposal that would have given government unions an effective veto over legislation. It's like, well, if that passes and right to work doesn't happen, did I just make a really big mistake? I was optimistic, though, and just a little bit of doubt. Well, that ballot proposal went down by 15 points that would have given government unions an effective veto over legislation, would have made right to work legislatively impossible. Right to work passed. The tax and the regulatory climate, they improved. And now let me tell you, Michigan had the highest drop in the nation for unemployment. Since 2009, we've dropped by almost 10 points. Our wages are up. People are moving to Michigan again. And buying that house in 2012, that was a darn good decision because my property values are going up. And it's all because of following a lower tax, lower regulatory, pro-worker freedom policies that Michigan is coming back. And I don't know if we're going to be nipping on your heels anytime in the very near future, but watch out because we're doing well. And thank you very much for inviting me, and look forward to Q&A.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Our next speaker today is Annie Spilman. Annie is the legislative director of the Texas office of the National Federation of Independent Business and heads up the organization's public policy and political programs. Annie has 15 years of legislative experience, both inside and outside the Texas Capitol. She brings a lot about that valuable experience in government relations and grassroots organizing and fundraising and other things to the NFIB Texas team. And for our purposes today, she also brings a lot of experience and expertise in the issue of labor policy. Please join me in welcoming Annie Spilman.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. Thank you, Bill. Like you said, I'm the state director for NFIB. We have about 24,000 members in the state, and we represent a cross-section of the economy, from manufacturing to retail, wholesale, to the service industry, to construction. And nationally, we've got about 300,000 members. And I'm proud to say that we have members in every 254 counties of the state. I first heard about the issue of paycheck protection, and I guess you would say the union issue in Texas, from a member of ours that came to us tired and a little bit desperate, in need of some help. And he's a very successful man that owns janitorial service in Houston and employs 1,600 people. That's a lot of people as part of the economy in Houston. But he was non-union, and so he had been harassed for many years, and he was kind of at his wit's end and didn't know what to do. So he came to his association, and that's what we're here for. So I talked to my counterparts in the other states and in D.C., and this wasn't a surprise to them. And I thought naively, well, Texas doesn't have a union issue. Come on, we're right to work. And I'd been working in and around politics for 15 years. I've never even heard of Texas having a union issue. Come on. But as we dug into it, there is an issue in Texas with the unions, and our government is part of that issue. One of the main, it's a public sector union, the SEIU, Service Employee International Union, was the one that was mainly targeting our members in Texas and nationally. A little fun fact, the SEIU in 2014 was the single largest, not union, but organization who spent the most money in the federal candidate campaign of $222 million. And they spend tens of millions of dollars annually on lobbying and political activities. So how do unions that represent those low to middle income employees afford to have to strong arm and have that political clout with those with business owners and politically? Well, you can thank our government for that. They're the ones that are funneling money from public employee paychecks into the unions to fund these lobby activities and everything else that they're doing. Now, don't get me wrong, in Texas it's voluntary for the employees to give their money through our government to go toward the unions. It is voluntary. They do have to check a box. In other states, it's not voluntary. They just garnish their wages to pay for these lobbying activities, these anti-business activities. So just a question for all of you. Before legislation was filed this session and before this panel, how many of you knew this was going on in Texas, that our government was collecting for the unions in Texas? So we've got couple hands? Yeah, not many. I was surprised as well. By the way, Texas has over 1 million full-time state and local employees. That's not including the part-time employees. So I like to say this is like fishing with dynamite for the unions. They've got a good gig here. I knew that we, the business community, would be up against a lot. We'd have an uphill battle from not only stopping the unions from harassing our members, our small business owners, but from pushing these anti-business policies that we fight every single session that are just job killers. And this isn't political rhetoric, this is real life. So in case I've been vague, I think it's a conflict of interest for the government to collect dues for any group that sits across the bargaining table from them. And we'll get into it as I go on here. But so I don't know if most of you are aware, but Senate Bill 1968 was filed. It passed the Senate, did not pass the House. It was, I thought, a very common sense bill. For the matter of this panel, we'll speak to the paycheck protection. In regard to paycheck protection, all it would do would take the government out of being the middleman, of being the collector for the unions. That's easy, right? All the unions have to do is just collect the dues on their own, directly, like any other politically minded organization, just like NFIB, right? Well, it wasn't that easy, just like anything else. So I only have 10 minutes, so I have a lot to get through, and I apologize in advance, and I'm going to have to rush. So, some say, well, why, when I was bringing this to legislators and talking to them, why does NFIB care about unions? We don't have a union issue. What are you talking about? Well, I'll tell you why we care about unions in Texas, and especially harassing our members. But they are single-handedly behind the issues that on its face our organization and really any business organization opposes, and that's one, mandated minimum wage. Look, our employees, when they can afford to pay our employers, when they can afford to pay their employees more, they do. Just because you mandate something doesn't mean that an employer can afford it. And so what happens? They have to cut jobs. That hurts the employees, the people that the unions represent. They had all sorts of anti-business legislation that they would push that we're against. Paid leave absences. They're already paid leave in law, but now they want us to pay them more and let them have as much time off as possible. That's a good way to run your business. So, I've only got 5 minutes, so I kind of got to rush through this. But in this session alone, there were 12 minimum wage bills filed, and so this is something we had to fight every session. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I don't like our government funding the lobbying efforts of a group that is trying to kill jobs in the state and going against my small business owners who are not only trying to put food on their table, but trying to help out employees, the people that they represent. So just recall that the funds that are used to use these lobbying efforts are funded by our government. So 1968 failed to pass, but it brought a lot of brought a lot of attention on what's been going on. I still don't think that the opposition came up with very good arguments on why they don't think that we should end this practice. A a lot of them had some opposition, and I'll tell you what it was, and I feel like I can rebut each one of them. They say, by ending this practice, you take away our constitutional right to have our freedom of speech, our freedom to associate. That's not so. Any public employee, firefighter, utility worker, garbage collector can still join any union they want, and I'm all for that. Join them, pay them directly, just take the government out of it. The other argument, it's safer for the government to collect our dues for us because, you know, there's identity theft and fraud, and if we give it directly to them, the banks could get involved, it's a bad thing. Well, I've got a lot of cases here and don't have a lot of time to go over, but there's been so many breaches in Texas State of the Comptroller's Office, 3.5 million records of Social Security's numbers, addresses, date of birth, driver's license. I think that was in 2011. There was a case in 2012. I mean, it goes on. I've got a list. Contact me after and I'll give it to you. And they argue that they would lose the convenience of having their dues deducted. First of all, that's not the rank and file employees that are saying this. That's the union leaders. Yeah, it is convenient for them. They don't have to make their case to the employees to be part of the union at all. They just get the government to take it out of their paycheck, and they're making millions of dollars to lobby against businesses, to lobby against this economy. So yeah, it would take away the convenience of the union leaders, but not the employees, because they can still give as much as they like directly to the union folks. So no convenience will be lost. And then lastly, they were saying we were picking winners and losers with this bill. Well, I think that there's already winners and losers picked, and small business owners are the losers here. And by the way, they were saying the charity list thing. God, I wish I had an hour to talk about this. There's a charity list that public employees can have money taken out of their account to go to the charity of their choice. It's strictly governed. It's audited all the time, and it says in the law that none of those charities can spend any of the money that's garnered for those wages on lobbying at all. And that was one of the comparisons they were trying to make. So, you know, lastly, since I have to wrap up, I would say this isn't an issue of, you know, union membership. I think there's a place for unions. Just like, you know, I'm lobbying for small business owners. They're doing what they can for their employees. They want to provide safe work environments, you know, higher pay. I get that. This isn't the argument here. The argument is that the government doesn't have a role in collecting for these unions. And unions have a good case here. They're trying to protect these guys. If they have such a good case, make that case to those employees, and they'll be happy to pay you as much as they want to pay you directly, and it's easy peasy. I still can't find an argument against taking the government out. It's a conflict of interest for them to be involved. The government is quasi supporting their policy positions against any other group's policy positions by being their collector, and I don't think it's right. You know, we have to collect our own dues. We have to make our own case, and I don't think that they should get a leg up because it's an unlevel playing field. And I think that's all the time I have, but I'd be glad to follow up with anything later. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Annie. Our next speaker today is Rick Levy. Rick is the Secretary-Treasurer of the Texas AFL-CIO, a labor union and civil rights lawyer in Texas since 1984. Rick began working for the State Federation in 1990 and has been a strong advocate for working families in the courtroom, in the streets, and in the Texas legislature over the last 31 years. His memberships and unions include the Texas State Employees Union and the Communication Workers of America and the Iron Workers Local 482. Please join me in welcoming Rick Levy.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Appreciate these panelists being willing to be seen in public with me, especially. It can only help my image. I appreciate it. And Bill left out the most important thing, which we allowed him actually to move into my neighborhood a few years ago, so we could have some diversity in terms of my Austin neighborhood. He brings a different perspective. But thank you very much for including us. I don't think we've spent a lot of time here at the TPPF policy conferences in the past, and so it's a privilege to be able to be here and share some ideas with you. I'm going to focus my remarks on Senate Bill 1968. I think many of the things that the gentleman from Michigan talked about really aren't issues here in Texas because we do have a very different regulatory and political framework. And 1968, I guess, gathered the most attention and really raises the most significant issues for the future in Texas, so I'm going to focus on that. So when Bill asked me to come here, I started to think, well, why would this be a good idea for me to come here and talk to these folks about this issue? And I thought about it, and despite the fact that he was the one that asked me, I said that there's going to be some people who support Senate Bill 1968 because in their heart they believe that unions are not a force for good in this society, and that weaker unions are a good thing, and that we have the power in state government now, or we almost do, and we just think that anything that weakens unions is a good thing. And I get that. I'm not shocked. There's certainly plenty of people who think that in Texas, and I doubt that anything I'm going to say today is really going to change y'all's minds. So I'll just say that right up front. And if I could just say, how many people, can they be honest with me? Sure. They can be honest. How many people just kind of feel like if it's bad for unions, it's good for Texas?
I don't even think so.
Okay, we got some. Thank you very much. I'll try and at least keep it interesting for you, but at any rate. And then there's other people who feel, I guess, I could talk to y'all about how people join unions for training opportunities or to have a voice at their workplace, or even having a union, kind of how it can help you solve problems at work. Or I could even, if I wanted to get really deep, we could talk about how I think unions are so important to really building the middle class in this country and how important that is for our democracy. But I think that might be next year's topic, Bill. We can get into that. But the problem is that I want to take this discussion out of the whole framework of business versus labor, take it out of the framework of Republican versus Democrat, and focus a little bit on the impact on the people that this legislation really is going to impact. And I think there are some, I hope that the other people who didn't raise their hand feel like, based on what they hear, like if I heard what Ms. Spilman said, I would be against I'd fire my own self if that's the way the situation was, because when you listen to the rhetoric and to the sound bites, it sounds kind of like a miserable situation. So what my goal is to present kind of the facts as they exist with respect to public union members in Texas, and to have a discussion about what is the true conservative position on dues checkoff for public employees, okay? Because as you know, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, Bill, and I can represent that position. But I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, okay, obviously. But I think on this issue, what I'm going to ask for the next 6 minutes is that people kind of think about this issue with an open mind about what is the true role of government when it comes to these issues, okay? So here we go. Wish me luck, y'all, because here we go. All right. So the way that this is the economic freedom series of events, right? And so the way that this discussion has been framed is, should government function as a dues collector for unions? And so I want to propose the discussion have a different frame, and that is that a bedrock, and you all correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you all are conservative, a bedrock principle of conservative movement in Texas is that Texans have the right to spend their paychecks free from interference with the government, regardless of whether the government likes what they spend their money on or not. Do people feel like that is a fairly articulated conservative principle? Anybody? A little nod in the back? Thank you very much. I think so. Thank you. And so, and that government shouldn't have the opportunity to pick winners and losers in terms of how employees spend their money. And so the way I would frame the question is, should the fact that unions are unpopular with some political leadership in Texas justify overriding those economic bedrock conservative principles of the economic freedom of Texas citizens to spend their money how they want? Because that's really what this debate is about. It really is. I want to talk about the issue of coercion that was raised a lot during the legislative session. And I want to get beyond the sound bites. My favorite, well, this is not my favorite quote, but one of my favorite quotes that was given by the proponents of the legislation trying to get people to oppose it. We have a, quote, rare opportunity once and for all to stop labor unions garnishing dues from the paychecks of our firefighters, our police officers, and our emergency workers. Please support Senate Bill 1968. Or, there's no reason why any private entity should have first dibs on someone's pay before they even get it. Those were the arguments that were being put in favor of why people need to support this legislation. If there's one thing I want to tell you, it is completely and absolutely voluntary for any public employee in Texas, whether they want to participate in a union or not, okay? We're a right-to-work state in the private sector, we're a right-to-work state in the public sector, and we don't even have collective bargaining for the vast majority of public sector workers, okay? So that's voluntary. It's also completely voluntary, whether an employee wants to have their dues paid by virtue of paying by a paycheck, by a paycheck deduction, by writing a check, by giving a credit card. It's completely up to that employee. So any employee that's having their dues deducted from their paycheck is doing so through 3 levels of voluntary choice that neither the union nor the government has any control over, okay? So let's dispense with the notion of words like garnishment, coercion, anything like that. We're talking about a voluntary choice. The second argument that's being raised is that government resources shouldn't be used to collect dues for union members, right? I think that's a fair statement, right? So my favorite quote on that in terms of the rhetoric, the kinds of things that we hear, exorbitant cost to taxpayers, quote, likely in the millions of dollars to collect dues from state workers, okay? The reality is that in a world of electronic payments, which is the way most people get their paychecks, it's the matter of programming a simple thing to take money one way or the other, okay? We deduct money for insurance, we deduct money for charitable contributions, we deduct money for union dues. There is no cost to the state. It's virtually nil, I should say. But even at that, and this is one of the things that is really important to note, there is specific law in the government code. I got all the sections here, I'm not going to go through it, that any cost that is resulting to the state by virtue of using these systems has to be borne by the entity receiving the funds. It is zero cost to the state or to the taxpayer to doing this, okay? So it's not a financial issue. Then they don't want special treatment for unions. Well, it is a safety and security issue. If an employee wants to have their money deducted from their check, they don't have to give somebody their credit card, they don't have to worry about writing checks. People came and testified about how difficult who writes check? When was the last time we wrote a check? Yesterday. Well, he's on the front lines, I'm not. Anyway, I'm much hipper than that, Senator. That's good. But the state allows literally hundreds of organizations to benefit from employees making this voluntary checkoff. And I just want to give you a couple, all right? The Wayland Baptist, they can get money. The Catholic Charities, the Catholic Charities can get money from state employees. Prison Ministries can get money from state employees. The American Family Association, they lobby. Focus on the Family, they lobby. The ACLU gets money. How do y'all like that? The ACLU gets money from state employees, from public employees making this voluntary paycheck. And so, in fact, this is not a special privilege for unions, but in fact, to repeal the right for this one organization when so many others are able to do it would be actually singling them out. Then the last issue I want to get to is this legislation exempted police and firefighters from the bill, okay? Now, if the issue is really coercion, expense, unions, etc., why are we exempting firefighters and police when firefighters and police actually are the only ones that can really collectively bargain? Regular public employees cannot, teachers cannot. And what's the distinction, the principal distinction that we're making between a teacher, a firefighter, a correctional officer, a probation officer, a parole officer. Why are we saying that it's okay for some employees to have that choice, but we're not saying that these other employees have that choice? So I think that that issue of selective enforcement with respect to the legislation is something that's troubling. So, one last thing I have to raise, apologize, put the sign down, it's okay, is the issue of political contributions. And this I want to be really clear about. It is absolutely illegal for a labor union to take money that they've collected for dues for an individual and give that money to a political candidate. So when you talk about the money that's being spent to give to candidates on a national level or DC level, that is money that is given voluntarily in addition to dues by union members across the country. That is not the issue that we're dealing with public employees here in Texas. It is expressly illegal to do so. So, like I said, if your goal is to just limit the ability of unions to represent their members because they're in conflict with some people outside the government, and you think the world would just be better off without us, that's certainly a rational choice, and you will support this legislation, I'm sure. But if your interest is really in conservative and limited and even-handed government that respects and defends the economic freedom and the economic liberty of citizens across the state, regardless of whether they work for the public sector or not, then I would hope that you would consider the facts, not the overheated rhetoric, and look at this legislation in that light. So I really appreciate, I don't think anybody walked out, so that's like a first for me, and I appreciate nobody threw anything that I'm aware of. If you did throw something, your aim is bad, so I'm not even worried about it. But anyway, I really do appreciate the fact that you would give me the attention and hear our views on the subject. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate your courage in coming and joining us today.
What are you going to say?
Our final speaker this morning is Senator Paul Bettencourt. Senator Bettencourt represents Senate District 7 out of Houston-Harris County and is serving his first term in the Texas legislature. He was appointed to multiple committees, including the Senate Finance Committee, the Senate Committee on Intergovernmental Relations, where he serves as vice chair, and also the committees on education and higher education. He's already made a substantial impact on the legislative process, being named as the most valuable freshman by the Capital Insider and labeled by Governor Abbott as an architect of tax relief. To that end, he is now chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Property Tax Reform and Relief. And we're very pleased to have Senator Paul Bettencourt with us today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Well, thanks for having me. A couple quick observations. Vincent, I'm glad to hear Michigan's doing better. I guess Governor Perry visited your state one too many times, so that's why you're here, right? He's trying to get some jobs, return flow. And I just can only imagine that Bill and Rick are on the same street in Austin. So I just want to know what the block parties are like. That's right. It's an interesting public policy. You have the arguments here, and then they go home and have it again. Now, I was proud to sign on to a sponsorship of Senator Huffman's bill, which Rick's already outlined, which you've got a handout on. It's Senate Bill 1968. And because I think that we need to view this simply as what happened in the 20th century is no longer needed to be happening in the 21st century. The idea of a union checkoff is effectively akin to people standing in line and punching a clock, and we're going to check off those dues. Rick is absolutely right. In Texas, we don't have a mandatory garnishing of this. Other states do. But also, Annie and Vincent are right that many states have removed this policy, even some of the most purely from the standpoint of overall population, the highest union membership states in the country. Now, the reason why they have, in my opinion, is simply a matter of choice. It's a freedom of association. You don't hear that as one of the fundamental 10 Bill of Rights, but it's a fundamental right that I think we should be talking about. And a freedom of association means you're willing to have any association with anyone you want in this country. And government should not be involved in picking winners and losers with this, because we do by allowing a union checkoff, because it's not like we're letting the Small Business Association have equivalent checkoff for activities that they would deem proper. Now, the specific thing that Mr. Levy said, and that he went on, that this is all about unions being unpopular. Well, no, it's not. It's all about what I think is fair and balanced public policy. I do respect him greatly for coming into a conservative audience and laying out his case, okay? And because I've done the same thing. I went to, and you know that, I went into Union 341 and told the firefighters that I'm going to file a bill that moves defined pension obligations, basically gives pension boards a choice. They should be using defined contribution in the 21st century. Defined benefit plans being, again, a product of the 20th century in a high interest rate economy. We need to leave that behind and go to defined contribution. Now, like Rick, I was brave enough to say it 3 times, okay? And I didn't get anything thrown in my head either at that point. But we need to recognize that just because we've been doing something in the past, it doesn't mean that we need to be doing it in the present and the future. Now, so I think when you just look at this from a pure freedom of association, I don't want government allowing a union checkoff. But also, I'm a purist. I had a group that came to me from my senatorial district, very conservative area in Harris County, and they wanted to check off for business development on their tax bills. And I told them I'm not going to carry the bill because I can't be for Senate Bill 1968 and carry their bill. Now, somewhat astonishingly, they actually understood that, okay? But because I don't want us to stay in the checkoff business, government needs to get out of this business. And we need to get out, and quite frankly, and stay out. Because we're not doing anybody any good in the 21st century. Look at what's happening here. Rick is well versed in, and it's a good attorney tactic to ask the audience the question, because we're asking the jury right now. How many people here shop online? Raise your hand. Okay, the entire audience, nearly. Okay, right?
Can I participate?
Yeah, you can, Rick. Right, that's right. And how many people use a debit or credit card to shop online? Okay, right? Because it's very hard to stuff cash through the computer portal, right? Now, it's ubiquitous use. Everybody's using it. So in this day and age, if you have any organization, there's no reason why freedom of association doesn't allow, and very easily, either direct deposit from bank accounts, debit cards, credit cards, automatic payments of a blizzard of types, because the private sector is enabling all this. You know, think about this. I was the first tax office in the country, as well in the state of Texas, to offer online payments, okay, 15 years ago. Everybody was very worried about security, very worried about what was going to happen. And now 15 years later, everyone shops online. So the private sector is caught up with this problem, which is, if you want to freely associate with a union or any other organization, you've got a dozen major methods to do it now. So let's let it get done by the private sector and get government out of this business. Rick did bring up one thing about coercion, but he didn't, I think, because Spilman had brought it up too. I didn't really know a lot about this, even I was in Houston, but I've had one gentleman provide me with several documents, which are kind of fascinating. Because the problem is when government intervenes and says, I'm going to collect your dues for this union, then all sorts of interesting things start happening, okay? I'm looking at a letter from the now mayor of the city of Houston to the president of Saudi Aramco, complaining about a company that's in the audience that happens to be a private company that was opposed to union checkoff. They're complaining about all sorts of other things. But I've got, at the time, a state representative writing a letter to a foreign president of a company saying that this company's terrible and they should be effectively, respectfully asked on behalf of the people of Houston that I represent, that Aramco Services hire a responsible cleaning contractor to its headquarters building in Houston. Well, that letter went out in June. In May, there was a letter from State Senator, who I debate at PBS a lot. We have quite lively debates. She's basically sending a letter to an asset manager in Atlanta about the same company, saying that they shouldn't be cleaning contractors for specific buildings for some reason. Two buildings, 1130-110 and 114110 Greens Crossing Boulevard in Houston. I've got the mayor pro tem of the city of Houston, who's now running for sheriff, who also sent a letter to the president of Saudi Aramco, saying the same outfit shouldn't be effectively being hired by Saudi Arabia. When you put government into something, government doesn't know when to stop. See, I'm not even complaining about Rick, or that Rick would write these letters, okay? I'm complaining about elected officials that think it's their right and their duty to get involved in private business elections. I mean, they're writing to somebody that's in Saudi Arabia, okay? And it's because they think that it's the right of their job. Now, as a conservative audience, you can only imagine what would happen if I wrote a letter like this, that in Houston, the media would be coming after me with a firing squad or death by hanging, or for the Star Trek fans in the audience, they would just use a phaser and try to basically disintegrate me. Because this is the type of policy that government should not be involved in. And when we get involved in collecting people's dues, people think they have the right to write letters like this, and they shouldn't. Because we are in the 21st century where freedom of association should be the hallmark, effectively a freedom of choice, but I like the term freedom of association better. So that's why I supported 1968, and when we get into question and answers, we can talk about exactly what the bill did, because there's some important set-asides in that bill. But I think it's important that we recognize the obvious, that if government gets into this business of collecting the dues, then people believe it's important for them to comment on what happens on union contracts from government, and quite frankly, we shouldn't be doing that. We should be out of that business. And I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you very much, Senator, and thank you to all the panelists. Are there any follow-ups or questions or comments that y'all would like to engage in before we go to Q&A? Annie, go right ahead.
I have some follow-up comments for Rick, who I respect, and this isn't a question about unions, and you can talk about how good unions are, and I can talk about how good small business owners are. They account for 4 million employees in this state, 50% of the GDP. They're great. I can sit here and talk to you all about that, just like he can talk about how great unions are. This is not the issue. It's really black and white. The government should not be in the role of helping any group collect their dues. It's not safer. That's ridiculous. There's been state breaches that have breached millions of records. And I think it's a little insulting for you to start out, and I love your humor, and you're a nice guy, but to say, y'all are all conservatives, so you don't really get it, and this is all rhetoric. Well, I can say that for a lot of other things, too. I take that personally because this isn't rhetoric, and there are real people that are affected by this that have been in lawsuits, and this isn't just happening in Texas. This is happening everywhere, and it's getting out of control. And to answer your question about the charity list, I have a whole 21 pages that I printed out, and you've probably read it because you do your homework. It's in the administrative code, and it's about the state charitable organization list. It's very scrutinized in law, in statute, and there is a section. So if you're trying to compare apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. There's a section in there that says that none of the money that the government collects from public employee paychecks to go to these charities can be used for Chapter 305 of the government code. You know what that is, right?
I do.
That's lobbying.
Right.
It's just, they keep using that argument, and there's no argument. You haven't answered the question, Why can unions not just collect their own dues directly? Why? What's the problem? Just take them out. I still want you to have members. I want y'all to collect a whole bunch of money, but I just don't want my government doing it for you. That's all I have.
Other thoughts, comments right now? Yeah, it seems to me that I thought Rick did a really good job of laying out some of the policy arguments on our side, perhaps. I mean, on our side, and then looking at those and responding to those. And I thought he made some really good points. I think, for instance, why did the bill that went through last time cut out firefighters and policemen? Right? I mean, if it's such a big issue, why should they be cut out of the bill? Anybody want to comment more about that?
Well, I just meant to speak to that too, and I'm sorry. That's just kind of what you do to negotiate getting something through. I think at this point, we all kind of agree that it's an all or nothing, that you're right. It should be a level playing field for everyone. We shouldn't cut out and exempt the teachers' unions or firefighter police officers. It should just be an all or nothing. And a lot of legislators wanted it to be and said, why are we exempting them? And, that's just kind of part of the compromises that you do when you move forward. But I agree with you, Rick. I think they all need to be in there. So that's a good point with me.
Wait a minute, before she says she agrees with me about they all need, if there's any police or firefighters, that wasn't the solution I was proposing, but anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Rick would like to revise and extend his remarks here. Let me tell you what Senate Bill 1986 did. There was also 2 or 3 other things in here. There was also a provision to prevent employers from being picketed when the employer's entity is not involved in a labor dispute, because that was happening. Keep state resources from funding political campaigns, and would have protected non-union employees from union representatives, effectively, maybe over-expressing their case. I don't think that maybe not everyone is as eloquent as Rick is during a mandatory federal inspection. But really what the essential point was that it was going to prohibit, it had a prohibition of direct deductions on union dues from public employees' paychecks, except as what was mentioned at the time, police, firefighter, emergency medical services. There was some testimony that I wasn't at the committee, but I remember watching it, that there was some issue about what type of catastrophic health care insurance I think those groups had and how that was collected. But I think the bottom line point is that that you have to decide what you want the role of government to be in the 21st century, and what do you want the role of government to be effectively in Texas, which is the biggest, obviously, right-to-work state in the union. And when you have that discussion, then again, I want freedom of association. I want folks to be able to say they want to belong to any group. I do not want government to be involved in enabling specific membership of collection, and which is why I turned down one of my local taxing entities, and actually a major a group of them, from trying to do the same thing. If you remember, who in the audience you used to have the choice of checking off whether you wanted to give $1 to presidential campaigns? Okay. Do you think that was a wise investment in the rearview mirror? Okay. Probably not. And it's not something I ever did, but again, I think that we need to be looking at in the 21st century, with all the business opportunities there are in the help in this area, with all the direct deposit, debit card, credit card. You can sign up 100 different ways to support whatever group you want to support, and we shouldn't have government picking one way, and that's the way that it's presented to employees. Remember, those employees are presented that information right when they're hired, okay? And there's no counter discussion, it's immediate. They have to make that decision right at day one. So I think it's much better that if we allow government to get out of that business, and let's stay with a rational method of doing of what government collections and paychecks are supposed to be about, because we would not have prevented the following. Under any circumstances, prohibiting a city, a county, or a state employee from joining a union or associating with their choice, or take away any freedoms of association to free speech, because that's what it's all about. Again, what I see here is when government gets involved in this, then people can't help themselves and start writing letters about why government should be even more involved and what are really private sector decisions or individual free choice or free association.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And Rick, by the way, thank you for coming up here. Doing labor issues in Michigan, I'm usually in your position, so no offense. It's nice to be on this side, but I know I know what you're feeling. Wanted to respond to one of the things that the senator was talking about, the second part of the bill that, you know, it seems like it's secondary, what's known as the secondary picketing. And I want to go back to what was going on with that janitorial services company that you referenced. It's a thing, it's called a corporate campaign. And let me tell you first what the corporate campaign is about and then what the goal is of the corporate campaign. One of the unions that the two main unions that specialize it are the UFCW, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, and the SCIU. And if you've all seen what's been going on with the bad mouthing of Walmart, that's the UFCW. Essentially what these unions try to do is harm a company's bottom line. And not just go after the company on a business sense, but go after the board members and the shareholders personally. The SCIU actually published several years ago what they call the Contract Campaign Manual. We call it the SCIU Intimidation Manual. It advises things like accusing board members and officers of a company of sexism, racism, leafleting their church parking lots, bringing to bear sympathetic politicians to write letters like the senator was talking about, to bring regulatory pressure. And the answer is that, by the way, has everyone here seen The Godfather? All right. Do you know the scene when the consigliere goes over to LA and he's talking to the media bigwig and he says, well, you know, you're going to have some union problems. I can make those all go away if you just give me what I want. That's what these corporate campaigns are about. And what do they want? First and foremost, they want to take away the secret ballot from employees. They want to organize them via a thing called card check. If you all remember that Employee Free Choice Act fight from a couple years ago, card check, essentially what unions want to do is they want to be able to pass around a petition or cards and say, hey, sign here. And if you sign the card, and by the way, sometimes the card simply says, hey, register for a pizza party. You sign the card, guess what? You just said, well, I want this union to represent me. And if they get 50% plus one of those cards, and the employer agrees to it, then they're unionized. They also want the employer not to say anything to their employees about what the union would do. They also want extra contact info from the employer to, by the way, could you sign this card? Do it at the home address of that employee. And, you know, by the way, you know, that's a nice car you have in the driveway. So that's what the goal of these corporate campaigns are, and that second part of SB 1968 goes to the secondary picketing of, like, the Walmart employees going out in front of a Walmart, it's usually not Walmart employees, it's usually paid union picketers, going out in front of a Walmart and trying to put pressure on Walmart to take away the secret ballot from their employees. And if you wanted to go one step further, Texas could actually pass a Secret Ballot Protection Act that, even for private sector employees, has actually been upheld in other states to go directly to the heart of what's going on with these nasty, nasty campaigns called corporate campaigns that aim to do nothing but take away the secret ballot from workers.
And the third-party picketing that pickets the janitorial services wherever he's got his janitors over at Cisco or something, and they go and picket Cisco and blow up a big, inflated rat to intimidate his clients to fire him, so he's no longer making money. But again, he's employing 1,600 people, and he's also paying above the minimum wage and outbidding people on contracts because he's paying more. But he's a disreputable employer. I just want to say that, Rick, I really do respect, I know that you truly are representing your people, and you are doing this for good, and that's not the question here. Just truly that I think, I don't think the government should help us out by collecting anything for us, just like I don't think they should help y'all out. But I am not questioning your motives at all, at all.
Representative, how are you doing? I just want to be clear. I don't think anybody's questioning anybody's motives. I think that I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. And when you talk about the corporate campaigns and SEIU and UFCW and Walmart and all that kind of stuff, none of the unions that represent state employees or teachers have anything to do with that. Okay? The letters that were being written by Mayor Turner, that sounds good, doesn't it, Mayor Turner?
Well,
okay, all right. And others, doesn't have anything to do with state employees wanting to have a safe and secure means to make their payroll deductions. And so I just, as we get off, each time we focus on the issue and then we get off into, and somehow all the bad things that unions do all over the country become a reason why we should take away a right that public employees have right now in Texas, when none of this other stuff really even concerns them. And I think because it's in the law. I mean, I think you would have a hard time explaining to the correction officer who drives 2 hours to get to work in the morning and just wants to have their membership in their union, why, because what happens at Walmart by SEIU, they're now going to have to give their credit card to another person that they don't want, or that they're going to have to write a check. Focus on the individual. Don't focus on DC, money, blah, 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 because the people who are actually impacted, that's who they are.
yeah, but Rick, let me tell you this. The reason why I brought this up, because you mentioned coercion. If you hadn't, I wouldn't have brought it up. Okay, so, because we need to talk about it. Okay, now, the difference is this. I see my colleague, Senator Huffines, over here. I have not asked Don this question, but I'm pretty sure of the answer. I don't think we should be in the checkoff business at all, right, Don? Okay, right now. Now, here's why, okay? Because it leads to people writing letters like this. I don't even know all the dispute, okay, that was there. But again, if government's involved in collecting the dues, then it's literally a way to put people into bad behavior again, where we decide we're going to intervene on a private sector contract because we can comment on it. We shouldn't be commenting on it at all, okay? That's my point, because, because it's not about what the public unions are doing versus me, because, right, we could go on, and if we gave Annie another hour, she's probably got a whole Magna Carta. That's what's happening. But the important point to me from a public policy standpoint is that when we look at this, I agree the secondary picketing is bad practice. It shouldn't occur, because the secondary picketing of companies that have no involvement is, again, something that is probably coercion. But to me, we need to decide what we want the government business of collecting off of people's paychecks to be. What are we doing in garnishing? What are we doing in withholdings? What are we doing in charitable contributions? But again, I bring this up because it was mentioned, and I just want folks to really think about it. If we had no union checkoff in state government, would we have state representatives writing letters about it? My guess is no.
I didn't mean, I appreciate you clarifying that, because I certainly didn't mean to say that unions don't engage in coercion. I mean, that's how we do stuff. I mean, that's how businesses do stuff. I mean,
Can I quote you on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if businesses were just willing to pay more than they pay now, but, out of the goodness of their heart or whatever it was, then unions wouldn't be necessary. Unions exist to force employers to do some things they don't want to do. That's kind of the private sector. That's kind of the way things work. And people with one interest fight with people with another interest. They bring to bear whatever resources they can in the struggle, and it comes out like it comes out. So I hope you didn't think that I was saying that that stuff doesn't happen in the private sector. I really do.
Since you brought it up,
I honor that. I don't think the reason Mayor Turner wrote that letter was because of the dues deduction. I think he probably was wanting to support people who he felt like he supported. I don't think it was the dues deduction that made it. I think perhaps it might have been campaign issues, it might have been political considerations, it might have been what he truly believed, but I really don't think that it was the fact that a public employee can have their dues deducted that led to him doing that. But
you know, Rick, without the representative, now mayor here, it's hard to know. We have been right, and again, I'm not speaking for Chairman Huffman or any of the other co-sponsors either on the bill, but I think it's an enabler because again, what are we doing in this business? Okay. And when we decide that we're going to take union check off, which I think is an outdated 20th century idea anyway, and in the 21st century, you can compete. See, you're eloquent enough, in my opinion, if you could sell to this audience, oh boy, can you sell to a union meeting, okay? Now, and if an idea sells, then it can be rewarded because there are now so many ways. I mean, look back 30 years ago. You didn't have, the internet wasn't even here. Al Gore hadn't even invented it yet, okay? And so now, but 30 years later, debit cards, credit cards, direct payroll reduction, there's so many ways that, and even the old way that Sue and I did, which we wrote a check for our property taxes, well, that wasn't actually a check we wrote yesterday, but we wrote that one on the 31st. Anyway, it's important that we just recognize the obvious. And the obvious is that freedom of association should trump everything. And that person that is free to associate with the union should also be free to pay the union whatever they want to pay, but not on government time with government resources.
All right, well, let's go ahead. Appreciate the conversation from everybody. We have a little bit of time still for some questions. There's a microphone back right over there. And if you go right over here, and we'll listen to Brent.
So I have a question for Rick. First of all, SEIU does represent public employees in Texas. But my question for you, I spoke to a teacher at Spring Branch ISD a few weeks ago, and she said to me, you have to join the union. And I said, you don't have to join the union. She said, I graduated from A&M, first job teaching elementary school in Spring Branch. They get you in a room, and another teacher, the head teacher, tells you you need to join the union. She said you have to join the union. We have 100% participation, and if you don't join, you'll ruin it for everybody. That's coercion, and the union had nothing to do with it. It was another public employee. So my question to you: how do you protect that teacher?
Well, that teacher has the absolute right to not join the union. That teacher has the absolute right to not have their dues deducted by payroll. Now, I don't know how you. I mean, if what you're saying is peer pressure caused that person, how do you stop peer pressure in a workplace? I guess I don't know. I guess I would say that probably I think I saw a statistic that you might have published here. How many public employees are there in Texas? 1 million? Somebody said 1 million? Okay, and there are about certainly less than a couple 100,000 folks who join the union, so obviously for about a very large percent of them, they find a way to say no. Now, are there people somewhere who felt like they needed to do something because of peer pressure? Yeah, I mean, obviously that's going to happen, but is that the kind of anecdotal situation that we're going to, pass a law that's going to affect hundreds of thousands of people across the state? That's what I don't. The government is not coercing anybody, and that's what I think we need to be really clear about.
Here, let me just add something to your questions. This is Southwell. I appreciate the discussion because the letters about you indicate what government does when it gets involved in stuff, and it can't stop. Okay. Now, to your point about the young Aggie that's at Spring Branch Independent School District. See, when you're presented with a union checkoff request right away, you've got that long to decide what to do, okay? And I think that's the wrong signal. So we shouldn't be in that business, okay? Because that means that person, the day one they set up, They have no time because all they get is this. Now, here's the important point. I think that to the average person, and it's 60% of registered voters in Texas believe it's a conflict of interest for government to collect union dues for labor unions. 62% of Texans support legislation to end government dues withholding for labor unions, and a whopping 57% of union members who are registered to vote believes allowing government to withhold union dues represents a conflict of interest. Because really what we have here is the reason why I brought up the letters after he mentioned coercion. I appreciate his very straightforward comments, by the way. Okay. Yeah, because it happened. Right, it's happened, but people would say that you could easily make an argument from a lot of people that that's a perceived conflict of interest. And I think that Texans are right. I think that when they are presented with that right request, when that young Aggie hit that employment, office for the first time, and they had to do it like that, then that's the conflict that I don't want to see. Government shouldn't be in that business. That's a great question. Thanks for your slog through the public policy of this. Okay.
Well, another question out here? Any more questions? Got
one in the back.
Do you see one right there? Okay, yeah, right back there.
To your point, I know you guys don't want to get into this morass, but I'd suggest that the government probably shouldn't be in the business of doing any checkoff, including charitable, by the way. But I don't think you necessarily want to get into that fight in the next session. As a private employer, I personally support significantly a number of organizations: Boy Scouts of America, Communities in Schools, E3, public charter schools, etc. I encourage, I'd like to see some of my employees support them as well. I could set up a means by which I could collect or expedite the collection of those contributions, and I could observe directly or indirectly the number of my employees participating in that, kind of the United Way drive kind of situation. I choose not to do that because I believe that if I have any knowledge, or anyone that works for me in my organization is asking those employees, don't you want to support the Boy Scouts? Don't you want to support Mr. Gore's favorite organization, Communities in Schools? It would be really great if you wanted to support that, wouldn't it? And there's an implied, whether I would ever know about it or not, it's implied at the point that my HR person asked that question. It's implied that I somehow am going to evaluate their viability as employees in some part based on whether or not they support those organizations that I support. I choose not to do that because I believe that money that they earn is their money, and they ought to be able to choose freely without any expressed or implied coercion as to where that money gets spent. Ergo, I would suggest ultimately the government shouldn't be in the business of doing any charitable, although there's many more of the organizations, but for the same reason. The question is, would you guys even ever contemplate that?
Well, I didn't quite get all the question, but I do think you're the conservative that Mr. Levy was looking for. Because you have the right comment, too. As an employer, too, there's always a tremendous number of great organizations that you could support, but I leave it up to my folks to decide which ones they want to do themselves. And I think, like all legislation, we're looking at incrementalism. And if you were here in the last debate, you heard me talk, or my colleagues talking about a bill that I had that would roll back taxes. We need to roll back these checkoffs because it's important that we don't do the next step. And I want to talk about this just real briefly. I had groups that wanted to bring on their tax bill the ability to have a checkoff for business development, because they wanted to be able to take more money voluntarily from taxpayers to go do business development over a wide swath of Harris County. It's the wrong mentality. We need to be going in the other direction. And you're right, the charitable issue is more complicated at a state level, but we need to be headed to less involvement of government in everyone's lives as opposed to more. So thanks for your business.
All right. Well, One thing I took away from this panel is I wish I could snap my fingers like Senator Bettencourt does. I can't do that. But and then the other takeaway I think is that there's a lot of debate out there about this issue. It's something that's very important to a lot of people from a lot of different perspectives, and it's something I think we're going to continue to see some debate on here about in Texas. So thank you all for attending. Remember that if you're looking for CLE credit, the sign-up sheet is right over there. And thank you for being here, and help me to thank our panel one more time here.